Top 10 comedy movies that were way better than we expected. The best comedies in the history of cinema achieve more than just making you laugh, although, granted, it's not a great comedy if it barely makes you crack a smile. Classic rom-coms, like The Philadelphia Story, have us yearning for true love, while teen movies, like Mean Girls, get us cringing at memories of being too dorky to join the cool gang at school. Then there are the political satires, like The Death of Stalin, which serve up uncomfortable truths alongside the funnies. And finally, when we need to get into the festive spirit, the Christmas film archives are crammed with titles that leave you giggling into your eggnog. All of which makes choosing the top 10 best comedies of all time a little tricky. To help us with the task, we enlisted the help of comedians such as Russell Howard and Diane Morgan, actors John Boyega and Jodie Whittaker, among others, directors and screenwriters, including Richard Curtis, as well as several time-out writers. So the next time you need something to turn the frown upside down, you'll know exactly where to start. Number 10. Mean Girls. A sweet-souled daughter of zoologists, 15-year-old Katie Lohan goes from a lifetime of home tutoring in the African bush to a high school in suburban Chicago. Once there, she immediately grasps that the pitiless laws of the jungle apply equally readily to the various sharp-toothed species of American teendom. A scowly artiste, Kaplan, and a zinger-zapping gay guy, Franzese, adopt comely Katie as one of their own, and, just for laughs, set her on an undercover mission to infiltrate the consortium of high priestesses, led by terrifying alpha girl Regina McAdams. Tina Fey's deft, precisely detailed script dramatizes Rosalind Weissman's bestseller Queen Bees and Wannabes. Happily, Faye and Waters gently tweak the studio's usual high-gloss caricature of adolescence and aim for acutely hilarious and surprisingly empathic sociology. Number 9. Pulp Fiction. A sprawling, discursive fresco. 3 stories bookended by a prologue and epilogue. In the first story, a mobster, Travolta, is charged with looking after the irresponsible wife, Thurman, of his vengeful boss. In the second, a washed-up boxer, Willis, tries to trick the mob by failing to throw a fight. And in the third, two hitmen, Travolta and Jackson, carry out a job, only to call on the services of a cleaner, Cadle, when it gets messier than planned. It's the way Tarantino embellishes and finally interlinks these old chestnuts that makes the film alternately exhilarating and frustrating. There's plenty of sharp, sassy, profane dialogue, and there are plenty of acute, funny references to pop culture, though the talk sometimes delays the action, and the references sometimes seem self-consciously arch. And there are, too, the sudden lurches between humor and violence, shocking, but without moral depth. What writer/director Tarantino lacks, as yet, is the maturity to invest his work with anything that might provoke a heartfelt, emotional response to his characters. Very entertaining, nonetheless. Number 8. The Graduate back in UK cinemas as part of the BFI Dustin Hoffman season. Mike Nichols' near-flawless class satire still feels as sly, modern, and bracing as it must have in 1967. Hoffman plays Ben Braddock, the twitchy, disaffected son of middlebrow California wealth who begins an ill-advised affair with Anne Bancroft's bored-out-of-her-mind cougar Mrs. Robinson, but finds himself way out of his depth. Countless scenes have leaked into the wider culture. Mrs. Robinson blocking Ben's nervous escape with one perfectly placed leg. A tedious friend of the family stopping our hero to discuss his bright future in the promising world of plastics. Hoffman floating topless on a lilo. This diminutive New York theater actor knowingly posed as a paragon of glamorous Hollywood manhood. Simon and Garfunkel's cheery songs are lovely, though, as Paul Simon has admitted, the song Mrs. Robinson has no relevance to the film aside from its name. And the chase to the church finale is magnificent, culminating in one of the most unnerving and downbeat closing shots in cinema. It's possible to pick holes. Catherine Ross is badly underserved as Mrs. Robinson's comparatively bland daughter, but its blend of sardonic wit and simmering frustration hasn't aged a day. Number 7. The Philadelphia Story. Cukor and Donald Ogden Stewart's evergreen version of Philip Berry's romantic farce, centering on a socialite wedding threatened by scandal, is a delight from start to finish, with everyone involved working on peak form. Hepburn's the Ice Maiden, recently divorced from irresponsible millionaire Grant, and just about to marry a truly dull, but supposedly more considerate type, Howard. Enter Grant, importunate and distinctly skeptical. Also enter Stewart and Hussey, snoopers from Spy magazine, to cover the society wedding of the year and throw another spanner in the works. Superbly directed by Cukor, the film is a marvel of timing and understated performances, effortlessly transcending its stage origins without ever feeling the need to open out in any way. The wit still sparkles, the ambivalent attitude towards the rich and idle is still resonant, and the moments between Stewart and Hepburn, drunk and flirty on the moonlit terrace, tingle with a real, if rarely explicit, eroticism. Number 6. The Mask, a totally banal murder plot, is enlivened by sequences depicting the psychedelic nightmares induced by a magical burial mask, which impel first an archaeologist, Lavat, then the psychiatrist who refuses to believe him, Stevens, to murderous frenzies. When the mask is put on, the audience gets the cue to put on the cardboard specs. The 3D process is tacky in the extreme, but some of the graphic effects, credited to Slavko Vorkovich, are quite unusual. Number 5. School of Rock Jack Black is at his most endearing in this underdog story about a struggling musician who poses as a substituted teacher and ends up coaching a class of misfits to compete in a battle of the bands. Sure, it echoes Sister Act 2, but Richard Linklater's film pretty much defines the term ebullient. It sails on a wave of pin-sharp one-liners, constant heavy riffage, and plucky performances from the young cast. Number 4. The Big Sick? There aren't too many modern comedies with the chutzpah to pull off a 9/11 joke. There are even fewer to give us a Pakistani-American culture shock romance that isn't awash with cliches, okay, ignoring at least one killer Uber gag. Take a bow, then. Emily V. Gordon and Kumail Nanjiani, the real-life couple who penned it inspired by a real-life gem that does both, and a whole lot more besides. We meet Emily. Zoe Kazan plays Gordon's on-screen surrogate, and Kumail, Nanjiani playing a version of himself, doing all the standard stuff, dating, having sex, watching Vincent Price's movies. Then she falls into a coma, and suddenly for Kumail, there's heartache, hospitals, and parents to deal with. Funny and wise, The Big Sick is one of those rare comedies with something genuinely fresh to say. Number 3. Old School. Director Todd Phillips found critical and commercial acclaim with The Hangover and, more surprisingly, Joker. But he forged his cult with this early-aughts Animal House riff that serves as an appetizer for a decade of Apatow-adjacent bro comedies. The plot is pretty boilerplate. Old guys start an on-campus frat for outcasts. Blover Dean can't deal with it. But it's all executed with chaotic zeal thanks to a stacked frat pack cast that includes an especially manic Vince Vaughn. The real breakout, though, is Will Ferrell, whose internal battle between middle-aged family man and party-obsessed Frank the Tank provides the film a Jekyll and Hyde dynamic soaked in bomb water and cheap beer. Old School announced the arrival of Will Ferrell movie star, and it did it in the most Ferrell way possible, by going streaking. Number 2. The Great Dictator? Chaplin acts the roles of Hitler, alias Adenoid Hinkle, and a Jewish barber who returns as an amnesiac, decades after an accident in World War I, totally unaware of the rise of Nazism and the persecution of his people. The representation of Hitler is vaudeville goonery all the way, but minus the acid wit and inventive energy that Groucho Marx managed in his impersonation of authoritarianism gone berserk in Duck Soup. Mr. Nobody is eventually carted away to a concentration camp, which leads to a reversal of roles when the barber escapes and is mistaken for Hinkle on the eve of the invasion of Austria. Cue for an impassioned speech about freedom and democracy, calculated to jerk tears out of the surliest fascist, in a manner startlingly similar to Hitler's very own delivery. Number 1. Kingpin. Harrelson's Roy Munson, the 1979 Oder Eaters 10-pin bowling champion, has been 17 years on the skids, paying off the bubo-encrusted landlady of his verminous flophouse with vomit-inducing bouts of sex, if he's lucky. Only with the arrival of fright-wig con artist Ernie McCracken, Murray, gleefully camp, do things look up. McCracken teaching him to make money hustling 10-pin, until he's abandoned to a bunch of rednecks who tweak of him and slash off his bowling hand. Undaunted, he happens upon Quaid's Ishmael Borg, an ingenuous Amish and fellow bowling natural, and they take off for the national championships in Reno, pausing only to pick up miniskirted personal companion Claudia, Angel. There's something arresting in the sheer commitment the Farrelly brothers bring to the naff gags, pratfalls, and ritual humiliations these three go through. More beguiling still is their warts and all depiction of low life. So upfront it ends up quite affectionate. Equally, the keen observations quash charges of cynicism, dumbfounding. With that, we end today's video. Don't forget to join in a next time for more of such interesting content.
They love it when I turn up the bass.